Namaste and welcome everyone to part 6 of the Tuesday teaching series, Two Truths in Buddhism with Venerable Tenzin Legtsok. Video recordings of all previous sessions are uploaded on CKSL YouTube channel. So please visit Khor Ling YouTube channel, subscribe to us and hit that bell icon to receive notifications. So Venerable has been online since 6:30, and so without taking more of our teacher's time, let's welcome Venerable Tenzin Legtsok. Legtsok.
Everyone. Welcome back. So let's continue. So let's start as we usually do with motivation, a little bit of meditation to generate a positive motivation and go for refuge. So get comfortable in your, wherever you're sitting. So take a moment first to focus your mind within on an object of meditation to generate some kind of stillness, inner stillness, and clarity and focus. And then visualize yourself surrounded by all sentient beings. So we can begin with our father of this life. Imagine seated to our immediate right, and then all of our male friends and family seated to our right and behind us. And then imagine our mother of this life seated at our immediate left, and all of our female friends and family to our left and behind us. And then imagine those whom we're most prone to become irritated, angry with, antagonists, seated directly in front of us, facing towards us. And then imagine all the other sentient beings, all in human form, seated all around us. So then briefly take a few moments a couple minutes to generate positive motivation. Within understanding our relationship with all sentient beings, our interrelatedness with all sentient beings. So especially we can reflect how our own suffering. The Buddha's teaching starts with the truth of suffering. our own difficulty and problems in this life, and then because we exist, we've taken rebirth, we live now, we'll die through the force of afflictive emotions and karma. Then recognizing that if that situation continues, we take rebirth again through the force of afflictive emotions and karma. Again, we experience all different kinds of problems and suffering, old age, sickness, death, without end. So think about the suffering of all of samsara for oneself. Generate the wish to be free from that as renunciation, and then think about thinking about the same problems, sufferings that are experienced by ourselves are also experienced by others. And thereby thinking about that, wishing to free others from suffering, we generate compassion. And then also it's important to remember the possibility for well-being and happiness for ourselves, because all of our suffering arises from the fundamental cause of ignorance, grasping at inherent existence, grasping at things existing in a way that they do not. So thereby, by generating wisdom, understanding how things actually exist, we can totally eliminate the causes of every form of suffering for ourselves. And we can completely purify our minds, develop all positive qualities up to full enlightenment. So we can aspire for that for ourselves, and then also the same is true for every other sentient being. Have the exact same potential for full enlightenment, to be free from suffering and to have full enlightenment. They have the same potential we have. So in short, we can try to motivate that we engage in this session on the Four Noble Truths in order to free ourselves and other sentient beings from every form of suffering, and to develop for ourselves and every sentient being, every other sentient being, every form of well-being and happiness up to complete enlightenment. So then if you like, visualize in the space before you, Shakyamuni Buddha, who's one essence with your own guru. And recognizing how they are an embodiment of the Buddha, who's the teacher, like a doctor. The Dharma, which is like the medicine that the Buddha taught. And then the Sangha, which are like the nurses who help us, who administer and help us take the medicine, practice the doctor's advice. So with motivation, of renunciation, of bodhicitta, then we can entrust ourselves and turn for guidance to the Buddha Dharma Sangha. We can recite Buddha's main mantra 3 times as a way of going for refuge. Okay, so we can end the preliminaries there and then look at the actual material for the session. So we're looking at the two truths presented according to the four Buddhist schools. So we've been through the Great Exposition School, the Sutra School, and then last week we were looking at the Mind-Only School, their presentation of the Four Noble of the Two Truths. So what I was, remember in the Mind-Only School, basically the true truths are divided according to how the direct cognizer, which realizes phenomena, how it apprehends those phenomena, right? So, and whether it has a dualistic appearance or not, right? So if the direct cognizer, which realizes a particular phenomena, like say my watch sitting on the table, so I keep track of time. So if the direct cognizer realizing a particular phenomena has dualistic appearance, then that phenomena is called a conventional truth, right? So for example, the direct cognizer apprehending my watch is an I consciousness. So because according to the Mind-Only School, then for the I consciousness that directly experiences my watch, it has dualistic appearance. It's conjoined with dualistic appearance. It means the watch appears to that I consciousness as externally existent, when in actuality it's not, right? So there's a perception that the watch exists as something distant. So externally existent for the Mind-Only School means it appears that the watch exists as something distant and separate from, as disparate from, not connected with my I consciousness, right? The direct perceiver perceiving it. So the same is true for anything that you see around you in your room. So does it, you can ask yourself the question, does it seem that the things I see around me in my room, the books, the walls, the table, the windows, and so forth, do they appear as if they are merely a projection of my mind, and thereby they're one essence with my mind? Or does it appear like there's something separate from my mind, like they exist through their own power, right? And that they exist as external objects, which I'm just experiencing with my mind, right? So probably for all of you, then they appear as they appear to be externally existent. So we can check the same so that's the objects of our I consciousness. So we can check the same with our sounds. It's the next major sense consciousness, our ear sense consciousness. So the sounds we hear, whether just my voice, or like here I can hear crickets chirping outside. I can hear some people talking in the distance. So it appears to me like all those sounds, probably Shanti can hear her apartment generator running in the background. I can't imagine what other people hear. Dilshad looks very quiet, or Dilshad is. But those sounds we hear, probably does it appear as if they're like sounds in a dream, that they're projections of our mind? Or does it appear like they're coming from outside? They're coming from sources outside and just appearing to our ears and our ear consciousness, right? Probably it looks like they're coming from outside. It doesn't look like they're one entity with our mind, right? So again, according to Mind-Only School, all those sounds are one entity with our own mind. They don't have any external existence, external reality. And then we can check the same for the next major sense consciousness, is our nose sense consciousness. So the smells maybe looks a little bit more like, maybe they're kind of, somehow dependent on my nose, like what I smell. But generally we think, smells we smell. It seems like, if we smell someone else's like body odor, definitely we don't feel like it's one entity with our own mind, right? It very much looks like it's one entity with their body, right? Not our mind. Or if we smell like perfume or you know, sandalwood, for instance, something very strong fragrance, it very much appears like that scent and the way it smells, right? Like it's coming from outside, right? It's coming from the object, which is the source of that smell. You know, like when I have water bowls, you can see behind me on the altar there, you can see some water bowls. When I have water bowls in the morning, usually I put rose water in the water first to make it more fragrant. So, you know, if I smell the rose water, it has a very strong smell, right? Rose water. So I definitely, it appears to my mind like the smell of the rose smell of the rose water, it's coming from the side of the rose water, right? It's not, and the rose water and the smell of the rose water, those things don't appear as if they're projections of my mind. They appear as if they have external reality. So then the same with our, you know, the next as our taste, our tongue, sense, consciousness. When we taste food, it very much appears like the flavor of that food is possessed by, I mean, it is possessed by the food, but for the mind-only school, both the food and the flavor of the food are one entity with the mind that experiences those, right? So whether that be an eye consciousness or a tongue sense consciousness, that tongue sense consciousness, when it experiences, like, say, the flavor of saffron, for example, that the flavor of the saffron that we experience and the tongue sense consciousness which experiences it, those two are one entity, meaning that those two things have arisen from one karmic seed, right? One kind of seed or a potential, and the seed here is like a potential in our mind. Just like an external seed that we plant in the ground, it has the potential to grow into different things that are part of one thing, right? Like a plant with leaves and fruit and you know, and flowers and branches and trunk and so forth. So just like an external seed, it's like one small package that has the potential to become many different things that are all part of the same entity, right? The same object. Similarly, the mind-only school is saying, like, just like in dreams, when we give rise to dreams, there's the same entity in our mind, the same karmic seeds in our mind give rise to both the dream consciousness, which is experiencing things, and the objects of that consciousness, right? The things that we see or hear or taste in our dreams, right? So the objects of our dream consciousness and the dream consciousness itself, they both arise from the same potency in our mind. So the mind-only school is saying, just like that, in waking life too, it's just the same. All the things we experience, even though they appear as if they have this external reality, that they have this kind of, they subsist due to and they're produced by and they're sustained by forces that are external to our mind, that have nothing to do with our mind. That actually, that's an illusion. That's not the case. That everything we experience is a projection of our mind, just like objects in a dream. So, so for them, then this dualistic appearance, dualistic appearance is primarily this appearance of things as having this external reality, as existing as things that are produced and sustained by forces that are completely outside of our mind. So there's this sort of appearance of things that's existing in a way that's distant from us, right? And distant from our mind. So that's what they mean by dualistic appearance, right? So now we come back to the definition of conventional truth, then is objects. Remember I said my watch is, we can take an example of my watch, such that, or we can take example, any of the things I just mentioned, we can take as examples. So objects for which the direct valid cognizer that apprehends them is conjoined with or has dualistic appearance, has this appearance of the objects being separate from that perception, right? So for all the things that we can see, hear, taste, touch, and smell, the direct valid cognizer that experiences those are the five sense consciousness, right? So for things that we see, like my watch or the table or the walls around us, the direct valid cognizer experiencing those is an eye sense consciousness. For things that we can hear, sounds, right? The direct valid cognizer experiencing those is the ear sense consciousness. And then for smells, it's a nose sense consciousness. For flavors. It's a tongue sense consciousness. And then for tactile objects like hot or cold, rough or smooth, what we experience those with our body sense consciousness, right? So for all those things, those physical objects in the environment, the valid cognizer that experiences them is one of the 5 sense consciousness. And the way they appear to those sense consciousness is conjoined with dualistic appearance, right? So they appear as if there's something external and separate from our sense consciousness. So for the mind-only school, then all impermanent phenomena, well, we start with just physical phenomena. I mean, all impermanent phenomena is true, but all physical phenomena are conventional truths, right? Because the way they appear to the valid cognizer, to the direct valid cognizer that perceives them, is as conjoined with dualistic appearance. They have this they seem to be external. And then also even our own even our consciousness, right? So if you look at impermanent things, we can divide into 3 categories. Or functioning things is another term used. It's the same meaning with impermanent things, but usually we talk about functioning things. It means they have the ability to produce effects. So we divide functioning things into 3 categories. There's forms, physical things that I've just been talking about, and then there's consciousness, and then there's something called non-associated compositional factors, which is basically a miscellaneous category of impermanent things that are not included in the physical and the mental, right? So that's like, as a person, we're that kind of thing. As a person, we're a non-associated compositional factor. So basically it means we're impermanent, or we're a functioning thing, but we're not physical and we're not something mental, right? We have parts of us like our body is a physical, and parts of us like our thoughts and our feelings are mental. But as a person, we're not either our body or our mind, we're something imputed upon the body and mind. But for the mind-only school, then also, so these other 2 categories of functioning things, other than forms. So our mind is also a conventional truth, right? So then what does it mean that for our mind, like our eye sense consciousness, our ear sense consciousness, or our mental consciousness, our thoughts, what does it mean that the direct valid cognizer that apprehends those is conjoined with dualistic appearance? So here probably there's 2 different ways they explain this. Let's see. Record on this computer. Okay. So for the mind-only school, there are every consciousness is accompanied by a self-knowing direct perceiver. So for the mind-only school, then every consciousness, other than self-knowing direct perceivers, right, is accompanied by a self-knowing direct perceiver. So self-knowing direct perceiver is like, it's like a well, what is it like? Basically, it's like it's a direct perceiver. It's a kind of consciousness that goes together with every other kind of consciousness, and its job is to experience that consciousness, and that's its job. So like, and the reason that the mind-only school posits these, also the sutra school posits the existence of these, also the autonomous middle way school, they both posit the existence of these. So the reason they posit these self-knowing direct perceivers is to explain why we remember not only the things that we experience, but we remember the experience of experiencing those things, right? So to make it more concrete means, think of something you saw today, right? Just think of something you saw. Like, I don't know, something easy for me to think of is guavas. I have guava trees outside my room. I was showing a friend a guava tree today, and we were picking some guavas, and I was giving away guavas to some friends. So I had the experience of seeing some guavas, right? So not only I can remember, on the one hand, there's two different kinds of memories, right? On the one hand, I remember the guavas. I remember their color, their shape. One of them had a wormhole in it, and it was kind of soft, and so I knew it had a worm in it. So I threw it away. So I could remember the object, the guavas that I saw or held today. I didn't eat one. I should have eaten one, but I didn't yet. Maybe later. So I can experience the object, the guava, but I can also remember the experience of seeing the guavas, right? So there's two different kinds of memory. On the one hand, I have a remembrance of the actual object, the guava, but on the other hand, I can remember seeing the guavas. I can remember touching them. So I can remember the mental experience that I have of seeing or touching the guavas, right? So on the one hand, I remember the object. On the other hand, I remember my experience of seeing or touching or thinking about the guavas, right? So we have to explain how we're able to have both of those memories, right? So why am I able to remember seeing the guavas? Well, just because I saw them, right? There's nothing more complex than that. I saw them, and then that made an imprint on my mind. So when I think about it now, I can access that imprint again. So it's that the I consciousness that experienced the guavas, it puts imprints on my mind such that later when I think about guavas, I can access those imprints, that memory, right? It's like putting information on a pen drive, and then later, and you name that file or name the folder, and later you go and search for that file name, and you can access that information again, right? It's the same thing. So, like I have the label guava in my mind. I see these objects. I think, okay, now I'm seeing a guava. That's kind of labeling. And then later, when I think about guava, I can bring up, the information related to seeing that object, right? So it's the I sense consciousness itself. It experiences the guava. It puts information in my mind stream in the form of imprints, such that I can remember that object. But so now that's quite simple, right? That's not very complicated. But now comes a little bit more complicated. So I can also remember the experience of seeing the guavas, right? So what gives me the ability to remember seeing the guavas, right? So for the mind-only school, so there's different ways to explain this, but for the mind-only school, for the sutra school, for the autonomous middle way school, they all explain that in order to remember the I sense consciousness, right? So to remember seeing the guavas means I remember the I sense consciousness that saw the guavas as well. So to remember that I sense consciousness, there has to be some other consciousness that experienced that I sense consciousness in order to give you the ability to remember the I sense consciousness. Just like if I never saw the guavas, I couldn't remember the guavas later on, right? Similar, they're saying if there's no consciousness that experiences the I consciousness which saw the guavas, then you won't be able to remember seeing the guavas, right? You won't remember the experience of seeing the guavas, right? So just like if you don't have a consciousness that actually experiences the guavas, then later on you can't remember the guavas. They're saying if you don't have a consciousness that experiences the consciousness that sees the guavas, then you can't remember the experience of seeing guavas, right? So that's why there's two things we're remembering: the object, the guavas, and the experience of the guavas. To explain how we remember each of those two things, we need two different kinds two different kind of ways, right? One is we see the guavas, just see them with our eye consciousness, thereby we can remember them. Then for the mind-only school, the second way is we have this self-knowing direct perceiver that goes along with our eye consciousness and experiences the eye consciousness. Thereby later on, we can have a memory of seeing the guavas, right? So anyway, this is to make a long story short, or shorter, it's already become very long. So the eye sense consciousness, which sees objects, it is, so the direct, what is the direct valid cognizer that experiences that eye sense consciousness? It's the self-knowing direct perceiver, right? So so then the mind-only school, because they'll say that the eye consciousness, and our ear consciousness, all of our sense consciousness are conventional realities. They're conventional truths, right? So then the direct perceiver that experiences them is conjoined with dualistic appearance, right? So, but here the dualistic appearance is different than with the physical things. So here the dualistic appearance is not that consciousness appears to be something external and separate from the mind that experiences it, because actually the self-knowing direct cognizer that experiences our eye consciousness, to that self-knowing direct perceiver, the eye consciousness doesn't appear as something different and distinct. It appears as if they're part of the same entity, basically. So what does appear is that the well, how do you say? Well, one hand you can say that that eye consciousness appears as being possessed by a self-sufficient, substantial, existent person. So that's one kind of dualistic appearance, is that eye consciousness appears as if it's something that's being used by, possessed by, owned by a self-sufficient, substantial, existent person, right? So that's one kind of dualistic appearance. Yeah, that's probably the main one. Yeah, I think for dualistic appearance, we'll just have to settle with that. I'm not sure how an additional one to posit. And then, so that's the same with all consciousness. Then they have, the direct valid cognizer experiencing them as a self-knowing direct perceiver. For that self-knowing direct perceiver, there's a dualistic appearance. So then, non-associated compositional factors like us as a person. Well, then what is the direct perceiver that perceives us as a person? That's a little difficult to posit. I mean, mainly when we're perceived by us as a person, we perceive ourselves with a conceptual consciousness. Yeah, so maybe you probably have to posit, because what perceives the direct valid cognizer that experiences us as a person. You could posit eye consciousness that sees the body, because that sees the person. So that has external appearance. You could posit the shortest moment of mental consciousness.
You look like
Yeah.
sense.
Nigger.
So let's just look again briefly at the definition. By the Sutra school, by the mind-only school. So that which is realized by a direct valid cognizer, directly realizing it by way of being together with dualistic appearance, is the definition of a conventional truth. And then definition of an ultimate truth is that which is realized, by a direct valid cognizer, directly realizing it by way of vanishing of dualistic appearance. So what can help us is that to understand what mindfulness school is talking about. So basically, when I'm talking about dualistic appearance, I've been emphasizing the experience of the appearance of objects having external reality, external existence. But we can also posit, like I mentioned, with regard to how the consciousness appeared to the self-knowing direct perceiver that experiences them. We can also posit as dualistic appearance the appearance of the self of a person or the self of phenomena. Right? So if a direct valid cognizer has basically any of those, either objects appearing as externally existent or having the appearance of self of a person, meaning a person that is substantially existent, basically, self-supporting and self-sustaining, substantially existent, or external appearance as the object and appearing as a different substance from the mind that experiences it, right? So we can say that for ourselves as a person, when we experience ourselves as a person, then to the mind that the direct valid cognizer, the direct valid cognizer that experiences ourselves as a person, to that mind we appear as something that's not one entity with that mind. Thereby, so we as a person, we are a conventional truth. So let's look at ultimate truth then. For the mindfulness school, the ultimate truth are things, that which is realized by the direct valid cognizer, directly seeing it, that is vanished by way of the vanishing of dualistic appearance, right? So they realize it by way of the vanishing of dualistic appearance. So for the mind-only school, then the ultimate truths are let's see, the selflessness of person and the selflessness of phenomena are the two ultimate truths, right? So anything that's an ultimate truth is the same with the Dharma sphere, or let me see if I can pull up this other documents. 1 minute. So for the mind-only school, then it's good to know some of the terms they use. So for the definition of ultimate truth, we already read. So ultimate truth, final reality, sphere of reality. So final reality is dharmata in Sanskrit. Ultimate truth is one meaning with final reality or dharmata, or sphere of reality or dharmadhatu, and final mode of abiding. So those four terms are all equivalent. So here you see there's a big shift from the Great Exposition School and the Sutra School. Remember, for the Great Exposition School and Sutra School, for the Great Exposition School, remember, ultimate truths were things that cannot be broken down further. either like, so partless particles that cannot be broken down further into physical parts, or shortest moments of consciousness, which cannot be further divided into shorter moments of consciousness, right? So, because those are the like fundamental building blocks of things. So that's what they call ultimate truths. Then for the Sutra school, remember, ultimate truths are things which have the power to produce effects, right? Because those are the things in their mind which are like more real. There's things, so all functioning things, all impermanent phenomena are ultimate truths, basically because it's like they have a power to produce effects. So it's like they make real change in the world rather than, and they have this real kind of substantial existence rather than things like abstract ideas or concepts or things which are merely a projection of our mind, which are less real, or that the appearing objects of conceptual consciousness, for example. The appearing objects of conceptual consciousness are always permanent. So they're just kind of creations, elaborations of our own mind. They don't have any real substantial power to produce effects in the world. So for the Sutra school, then impermanent things are the most real. But remember, I pointed out there's an anomaly that for the Sutra school, then, the thing that needs to be realized in order to overcome the fundamental cause of suffering, right? In order to eliminate ignorance, which is the most fundamental cause of suffering, the thing to be realized is selflessness, right? Selflessness of persons. But that is not an ultimate truth, according to them. That's a conventional truth, which is kind of counterintuitive, because you tend to think, well, the most important thing that we need to realize, that should be the ultimate truth. That should be the most important truth. But for the Sutra school, that's not the case. So that this is where this big shift comes. For the mind-only school and on up, for the mind-only school and then the middle way school, that is the case. That selflessness of persons and then selflessness of phenomena, those things which are the most important things to realize, those are ultimate truths, right? And impermanent phenomena, even though they have the power to produce effects, those things are not ultimate truths, because by meditating on those things, you cannot eliminate the ignorance, which is the fundamental cause of suffering, right? So I just want to point out this big shift that for the Sutra school and then the Great Exposition school, they're thinking about what an ultimate truth is more to do with what are the most important things that exist in terms of producing the world that we live in terms of producing us and in terms of producing the environment that we live in. What are the most powerful things for the Sutra school? What are the most fundamental building blocks for the Great Exposition school? Whereas, so to contrast that, for the mind-only school, their idea of what an ultimate truth is what is the most important thing, what is the most important characteristic about reality, right? The most fundamental truth of the way things exist, right? That we need to realize in order to free ourselves from suffering. And that's what they call an ultimate truth, right? So they're not concerned so much with about, well, what is the most fundamental thing that produces us and produces the world we live in, but more like, what's the most important thing we need to realize in order to be free from the suffering of samsara? And that we'll call an ultimate truth, right? So that way they're quite different. So then for the mind-only school, So for the mind-only school, then the two conventional truths. There's two different things that are conventional truths. One is the subtle selflessness of persons, and the other is the subtle selflessness of phenomena, right? So there's the selflessness of person, or the subtle selflessness of persons, and there's the selflessness of phenomena. So those two are ultimate truths, right? So the subtle selflessness of persons is just the same as it is for the Sutra school, right? So so what it is just like I explained before, the lack of substantially, let's see, Rangya Tupa Zeyudu Drupe Kagi Tongba. I have to say it in Tibetan first because that's what I've been learning it in for like 17 years, right? I never talk about it in English here. Rangya Tupa means own powered or autonomous. Rangya Tupa Zeyudu Drupa. Zeyudu Drupa means substantially existent, right? So for the Sutra school, the mind only school. So what does that mean is that there's a sense that I think the way I explained it before, the way it's commonly explained is, if we were to imagine, exchanging our body with someone else's body, right? If maybe we see someone else's body who we feel is like more attractive or more strong or younger, more healthy or something, whatever, and for whatever, or they just live in a different place, and we think, oh, if I could just change bodies with that person for a day. There's kind of a sense that we could do that, right? There's a sense that somehow there's a substantially existent person, us, who possesses our body and possesses our mind, but is something that has a different substance from those. So it's kind of like another way it's usually talked about is as if we're a king or a ruler, and our body and our mind are our subjects, or our ministers. Like we use our body and our mind. They're part of, they contribute to what we are as a person. We cannot deny that. But yet, as a person, we're essentially something different from our body and something different from our mind, and we control those and we use our body and mind. Right? They contribute to our power. They contribute to our ability to do things. But we are not just labeled upon those. We have our own kind of independent, we exist as an independent thing from our body and mind, and we use and control them. Just like a king controls his ministers, or the prime minister controls the more minor ministers. So that sense is what one of like us as a person having this existence as that has a substance and has an autonomous power that's not dependent upon our body and mind. That sense is what is grasping at a substantially existent, autonomous, substantially existent person, right? Or own powered, substantially existent person. So the lack of that, so that kind of person doesn't exist, right? If it exists, then when we look for it, we should find some kind of substance that is that person, right? We should find something concrete that we can point to and say, yes, this is that substantially existent autonomous person. But when we look, we cannot find any such thing. So for the Sutra school, for the mind only school, for all the upper schools, that is this, until we get to the consequentialist, basically. Well, actually, it's different, but let's just stick with the mind only school. In the mind only school, that is the subtle selflessness of person. The lack of this autonomous, substantially existent person, that is the substantially existent. That is the subtle selflessness of persons, right? So then, right. So then why is that an ultimate truth, right? So basically it's because, ordinarily anything we experience, in short, it looks like, say, anything that when we experience our body or our mind, it looks like our body or our mind are possessed by an autonomous, substantially existent person, right? It looks like our body is the body of an autonomous, substantially existent person, whereas in actuality, it's not. So that's a kind of false appearance. It's a dualistic appearance. And when we look at our mind, it looks like our mind is possessed by an autonomous and substantially existent person, when in actuality, it's not. So that's another kind of dualistic appearance. But so when we meditate on the emptiness of that autonomous, substantially existent person, and then we generate a direct perceiver, realizing the absence of that, right? So when we meditate on the lack of, the emptiness of autonomous, substantially existent person, at first we do so with a conceptual consciousness, and then we meditate again and again and again, and we can generate what's called a yogic direct perceiver, right? So it's a very powerful mental direct perceiver, directly apprehending the lack of a autonomous, substantially existent person. So to that yogic direct perceiver, so it's directly perceiving the absence of, right? It's directly perceiving merely the lack of, the absence of an autonomous and substantial existent person. So to that yogic direct perceiver, there's no longer the dualistic appearance of an autonomous, substantial existent person, right? So to that yogic direct perceiver, then the reality of that yogic direct perceiver itself, the reality of any phenomena, is totally void of, right, this autonomous, substantially existent person. So it's kind of like their experience of, there's a breakdown of the subject-object duality, right? So the subject is the yogic direct perceiver. The object is the mere lack of an autonomous, substantially existent person. So as they directly perceive that, then their experience is blended with the object. It's not the case that the object is out there and the perceiver is here, and there's this apparent great distance between them. But rather, because that yogic direct perceiver, they experience that their own reality is that also, right? They're experiencing, or they're perceiving, they're knowing an aspect of their own reality, right? So a reality of that mind itself, as well as external phenomena. So there's a vanishing of this dualistic appearance of of the appearance of an autonomous, substantially existent person, right? So that's the reason why then this subtle selflessness of phenomena, right, which is the mere lack of an autonomous, substantially existent person, that's why that is that's why it is a ultimate truth, right? So basically, that's the same for the mind-only school, for the selflessness of phenomena, right? Basically, it's the same. That so here it's a little easier because we can think about external objects is the main example here. So external objects like like we can talk about our guavas again. That remember I was saying to the eye sense consciousness that they appear to. So for the guavas or the table in front of us, the walls around us, to the eye sense consciousness that they appear to, they appear as externally existent. So whereas actually that's not the case, right? So when we meditate to realize, according to the mind-only school, that those things that appear to have external existence, actually they're just projections of our own mind. So then there's a yogic direct perceiver that realizes this, that physical things are one entity with the mind that perceives them, right? So there's a lack of them being substantially separate from the mind that perceives them. So basically, it's like learning to see that everything's in a dream. I mean, imagine if, first of all, imagine if when you're dreaming, you could recognize it as a dream, right? How that would change the appearance of things. It would no longer look like that things in the dream had external reality, but rather you'd recognize that, oh, they're just projections of my mind, and you feel much closer to them, right? There's a breakdown of the separateness or the duality of the subject and the object. So imagine if in your waking life, the same, that you could realize that everything around you is just a projection of your own mind. So it's just like you're living in a very long dream, you know, that's shared by others. So like I said last week, as the big difference between our dreams and our waking life is that our dreams are not experienced by anyone else, right? We can't, you know, we can talk to other people about our dreams, but they just have a very vague idea like what we're talking about. It's not like they can be in our dream and see the same things we're seeing, and we can share stuff in our dreams. Like our dreams are an experience that is experienced exclusively by us alone. Right? Nobody else experiences it. Whereas in our waking life, you know, other people experience it. People can come into our room, come into our apartment. We can, you know, cook food together, share the same food. We can talk about things. I hear what other people are saying, and they hear it. They hear what I'm saying. I also hear it. So we share things, right? We have shared experiences. So it's largely because of that we have the impression. So, I mean, again, I'm just talking according to the mind-only school view of the world, right? So according to the mind-only school, it's largely because of that we have this idea that there's an external environment that we just experience, but that environment has a separate reality from our minds. Whereas actually, so that's not the case. So imagine that we could, just like if we were to realize our dreams while we're dreaming, if we realize what we're dreaming, imagine if we could realize that everything that we perceive around us, that we see, hear, smell, taste, and touch, and that those things are all just projections of our mind, just like things that appear in our dream. I mean, one thing is like, first of all, just intellectually you could understand that. But imagine if that is reality and we could directly perceive that everything is just a projection of my mind, that there is no, you know, external reality that is not one entity with my mind, right? That is not part of my mind. Everything I experience is just a part of my mind. We can kind of imagine that. So imagine if we were directly perceive that with a yogic direct perceiver, then yeah, there's this vanishing of the duality of things existing as things appearing as separate from our mind, right? So that's the vanishing of this dualistic appearance. So I'll share my screen with you again, and we'll just look at this definition again briefly, and then I'll take any questions you might have. Okay. Oh, sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Mind-only school. The definition of ultimate truth is that which is realized by the direct valid cognizer, directly realizing it. Yeah, directly realizing it by way of the vanishing of dualistic appearance. All right. So the main thing I was just explaining is the vanishing of dualistic appearance is two things. So one is the vanishing of the appearance of things being possessed by an autonomous, substantially existent person, right? And then the second is the vanishing of, so that is for a yogic direct perceiver that perceives the subtle selflessness of person. Then there's the vanishing of the appearance of an autonomous, substantially existent person. And then for the yogic direct perceiver directly perceiving the selflessness of phenomena, there's a vanishing of the appearance of phenomena having an existence that is separate from or disconnected from our mind, right? So that is a separate entity from the mind that perceives them. Okay? So there's a vanishing of that kind of appearance. But yeah, just a disclaimer here also. I'm giving you a very kind of rough presentation of the mind-only school. Actually, the mind-only school is one of the most difficult of the four. It's perhaps the most difficult to understand. It's a very subtle, very complicated presentation of how things exist, how we exist, how other things exist. And it's been many years since I studied it in detail. You know, in the Geshe studies program here, we study the mind-only school in detail in the 6th and the 7th years primarily, or 6th and 8th years. Yeah, 6th and 8th year, I forgot. So I'm in my 17th year now. So it's been many years since I studied and I haven't done much reviewing in the meantime because I'm a very lazy student. So it's been many years since I was studying the mind-only school in detail. So just as I'm explaining things to you, I'm kind of seeing holes in my understanding, gaps in my understanding. There's definitely things I don't remember, and there's maybe things I didn't understand well when I was studying. So yeah, if you have an opportunity to learn more about the mind-only school from a better scholar like Geshe Dorje Damdul or someone else, then you can fill in some of the gaps that I'm kind of leaving. But anyway, if you have any questions now, I can try to answer them. So Shanti's done a great job of protecting us from the Zoom bombers. Thank you, Shanti.
I'm sorry about the disruption, Venerable, and I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. It's no problem. It's
Figure out
interesting,
a
actually,
way.
that they operate on the basis of thinking that anything that's related to sex or kind of foul language, that's going to be offensive to people, right? But that that existence of things being offensive, it totally depends upon our opinions, right? Upon the way we think about things, we see things. So if we, yeah, anyway, that's another topic. We have any questions?
We can't hear you, Fariza. I think, is it you, Fariza? Is that you, Fariza? No, Satya.
Are you able to hear me?
It's Satin. Yes, can.
Are you able to hear me, Venerable?
Yes, Satin, I'm all right. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yes. Although we have not started the Prasangika yet, but this statement like everything is like dream. Does it belong to mind only or Prasangika or their meaning is different in both the schools?
C, right? Yeah. So I mean that everything is like a dream is just an analogy. So we can apply different meanings to the analogy according to different schools, right? So the way I've been explaining it here is according to the mind-only school. And for the mind-only school, really, that is the best analogy to understand the mind-only school. But it's true that the Madhyamaka schools, the middle way schools, they both also use that analogy, but they affix different meanings to the analogy. I mean, they explain it in a different way. Does that answer your question?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Okay. From Archana, what is the yogic direct perceiver and how is it developed? Okay. Yeah. This is something. It's quite fundamental in Buddhism, but we don't talk about very much. Yeah. So a direct yoga perceiver is like this. Where'd Archana go? I don't see her here in the Zoom room. All right, maybe she's on YouTube or something.
Venerable, she's on YouTube.
Okay. So direct valid yogic direct perceiver is this. Basically, I have to think about it like this. So something like, say emptiness, as it's explained according to any of these schools. At first, we cannot, it's not something we can experience with our sense consciousness, right? So at first, when we realize it conceptually, based on logic and reasoning, right? We come to a conceptual understanding that things exist in a certain way. I mean, that things are, say, void of autonomous, substantially existent person. But then, so once we have a conceptual understanding, we meditate on that again and again and again, right? So real meditation only kind of starts when actually we generate calm abiding, shamatha. right? So that means when we're able to keep our mind focused on a chosen object for 4 hours or longer without the slightest distraction whatsoever, right? So it's an extremely focused and stable and clear kind of state of mind, which any of us have the potential to develop, but mostly we just don't, because we don't gather the right conditions and put in the time and energy to generate that kind of mental focus, right? So imagine you have a concept. So we bring these two things together. This conceptual realization of, it can be as simple, maybe the simplest to look at is impermanence, the subtle impermanence. The fact that things are changing moment by moment, every shortest moment of time, every split second. I mean, there is no shortest moment of time actually, but continuously things are changing, right? So what we see around us is gross impermanence. We see the sunrise, the sunset, the weather change, plants change. That's gross impermanence. But the subtle impermanence is the fact that every compounded phenomena is continually changing without cease. So that we can conceptually, we can't directly perceive it. It's too subtle, right? But we can conceptually understand that is the case, right? So we can generate first a conceptual valid cognizer, understanding subtle impermanence, and then we combine that with shamatha, right? With a mind that can be single-pointedly focused on an object. So with our single-pointed focus, or concentration of shamatha, we again and again and again focus our attention on, let's say, subtle impermanence or some form of emptiness. And so by doing that, we purify a lot of obscurations, negative karma. We also, in other ways, we accumulate merit. But we again and again and again focus our mind on this thing that is true and is real. By doing so, our mind becomes more and more habituated to experiencing that subtle impermanence in this case, as is my example. So our mind becomes more and more experienced to having a conceptual experience of that. And then through purification, accumulation of merit, and habituation of the mind, then eventually we gain a direct experience, so a non-conceptual experience of, say, the subtle impermanence or emptiness. Selfless as a person or selfless as a phenomenon. It's all kind of, the process is the same, just the objects are different. So at the point when we first generate a direct perception of one of these kind of subtle phenomena, subtle impermanence or selfless as a person, selfless as a phenomena, then that direct perception is called a yogic direct perceiver. Why is it called yogic? It's because it's been generated through meditative practices, right? And through habituation again and again and again. And why is it called a direct perceiver? Because it's a non-conceptual, valid consciousness, which is new and incontrovertible, right? So yeah, that's what a yogic direct perceiver is, basically. So when on the path, there's 5 paths. There's the path of accumulation, path of preparation, path of seeing, path of meditation, and path of no more learning, right? So on the 5 paths, in terms of realizing, say, subtle impermanence, or say realizing selflessness of persons, on the first two, right, on the path of accumulation and path of preparation, we only have a conceptual realization of emptiness. So the mark of entering the 3rd path is generating a yogic direct perceiver, realizing emptiness, right? At the moment we generate a yogic direct perceiver, realizing emptiness, that's when we begin the path of seeing, right? The 3rd path, the path of seeing. And at that time, we become an Arya being. Arya meaning superior, right? So we're called a superior being because we've generated that yogic direct perceiver, realizing emptiness. Other questions?
No questions on YouTube yet.
No. Teresa, you have a question? Dilshad, you guys usually ask something. Next week, we're going to move on to the autonomous middle way school. Well, it's okay. If you don't have questions, we can we can do a little meditation, and then we can dedicate. We just have 10 minutes left, right? Yeah. Why don't we do a little meditation? So get comfortable where you are. Take off my earphones. So last week, I think it was last week, at the beginning of the session, we meditated on just trying to imagine, generating this view of the two truths, beginning with the lowest of the four schools, the Great Exposition School, and trying to see kind of the world as they see the world, based on their definition of the two truths. And then, we did that for a few minutes. Then we tried to see the world as the Sutra school kind of sees the world, and then as the mind-only school sees the world. So it's like that way. In that way, we kind of progressively build up a more and more complex, or more and more subtle view of the world by meditating on the two truths as it's explained in the different schools. But maybe even a more helpful thing to do is to do the same kind of process, but look at the selflessness of persons, right? So how is selflessness of persons explained in the Great Exposition School? And try to generate that view. And then how is it explained in the Sutra School? And try to generate that view. And then in the Mind-Only School, trying to generate that view, right? So we try to generate a more and more subtle understanding of emptiness by looking at it as it's explained in the earlier schools, and then progressively the later schools. All right. But here, actually, we'll begin with the non-Buddhists, right? So, I mean, in ancient India, they were talking about the Tirthakas, but now even we can include, probably it's kind of the view of Abrahamic religions. So basically, the religions, philosophical schools that assert a creator God, generally they exert the existence of a soul, right? This kind of a permanent self that's unchanging, right? This kind of essential self that's permanent. I mean, in that it's unchanging. It's not changing by moment to moment. And it's not made up of more subtle parts. It's one whole entity that's not made up of more fundamental parts. And it's something that just is. It hasn't been produced by causes and conditions, right? So first try to imagine this kind of self, right? So this is the view that the non-Buddhists, the Tirthakas and others are they're asserting, that there's this kind of self. So when we look at the Great Exposition School, they're rejecting that kind of self, right? A self that is permanent and unchanging, a self that is partless, and a self that is not produced by causes and conditions. Right, but first we want to try to, before we look at the Great Exposition School's rejection of that kind of self, we want to try to get in the headspace of a person who asserts the existence of that kind of self. Imagine, like, what does that mean? Why are they asserting that, right? So the main reason is, I mean, we look at, if there's a past life, past and future life, there has to be something, the person that goes from life to life, right? So that would seem that that person is not the body, it's not the mind, because the body disappears when we die. It wasn't, and it didn't exist before we were born. And the mind seems like something we possess. Just like when we look at pictures from our childhood, we feel like there's, that person there is the same as this person now. It hasn't changed fundamentally. So try to get in the headspace of this person who believes in basically a kind of soul, a person that is it's separate from our body and mind. It's unchanging. And it's not made up of smaller parts. It's one whole entity, not reducible to smaller parts. And it just is as it is, either from beginningless time or just came into existence. It's not dependent upon causes and conditions. So then imagine the Great Exposition School. How do they reject, and why do they reject that kind of person, right? So basically, the Great Exposition School is saying, if that kind of person existed, it's not the body, it's not the mind. It has to be external to the body and mind, and it has to be unchanging. It's not made up of parts. It's not dependent upon causes and conditions. So they say, when you look within what we are as a person, all we find are things that are changing. Every part of our body, down to the level of the cells, the subtle molecules, is changing moment by moment. And our mind is continually changing. And when you look, it's totally separate from our body and mind. You cannot find anything that you can point to and say, that is me, that is a person. So therefore, the mind-only school says, whatever the person is, it must be something that's changing moment by moment. It can't be permanent. And then the Great Exposition School is also saying, and look at what are the most fundamental building blocks of things. The most fundamental building blocks of physical things are these partless particles, right? The person is not a partless particle. The most fundamental building blocks of consciousness are these shortest moments of time. Consciousness as it exists in the shortest moments of time. That's also not a person. So a person must be composed of parts. It must have as parts of that person those kind of fundamental building blocks. So therefore, the person also cannot be partless. I mean, in another way, because the person exists through time, then you can divide the person up into moments in time, right? Just like consciousness. So in that way, also the person is not partless. So the Great Exposition School asserts that, right, the person is changing moment by moment, and the person is made up of parts, either parts in time or more fundamental things upon which the person is based, right, that is composed of. So thereby they generate the view of that everything is empty of, right, a permanent, partless, own-powered person. There's no such kind of person. That kind of person doesn't exist. So try to generate that view. So here, even if you can just observe, so now in meditation, and then, try to make it more of a habit during the day at all times, the impermanence of yourself as a person, right? How we're changing every moment without cease. So then the flip side of that observation, that as a person we're continually changing. So the flip side of that is that there is no permanent person, right? There is no unchanging I, right? There's no unchanging self that remains static and remains exactly the same from one moment to the next. So especially when we have this, experience of looking at images from, many years ago, in the sense that that person there is the same as me, this person here that's looking at. There's something essential and unchanging that has, traversed time from then to now. But that's a total illusion, a total misconception. There is no such unchanging person. So relax your attention there. So just a final point is that, oftentimes when we look at like the mind-only school, the middle way school, and we, these complex ideas of selflessness, emptiness, sometimes we feel kind of hopeless, like we're never going to get it, what they're saying. But a good place to start is just with impermanence. I mean, really the best place to start understanding emptiness is really with the basics of impermanence, and just try to, in your meditation, in your own daily mindfulness, try to be mindful of how everything is changing. Not everything, because there's permanent things, but most of the things we experience, ourselves, the environment around us, they're all changing moment by moment without cease. So, just trying to be more mindful, that loosens up our grasp at a very concrete kind of reality. And also heightens our awareness of interdependent arising, which then it leads us towards then being able to understand more subtle levels of selflessness of persons and selflessness of phenomena. Right? So it's very, very important and very helpful kind of mindfulness to practice. It's mindfulness of subtle impermanence, which begins with mindfulness of gross impermanence, right? But that's very easy. Okay, let's just dedicate very briefly now. I've already gone over time. So think of all the merit that we've created so far. Sorry, this is the wrong document. And rejoice. So think how excellent it is. We're not wasting our lives Zoom bombing other people. We're actually trying to, learn about, meditate on the Buddhist teachings in order to improve the quality of our lives, in order to be able to improve the quality of other people's lives, in order to bring peace and happiness and harmony to the world. So rejoice in your own efforts, rejoice in the efforts of others in this session, and rejoice in the efforts, virtuous things done by countless other sentient beings. Virtuous things done by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, especially our own gurus, His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Lama Zopa Rinpoche, and so forth. All the people in the FPMT, especially all the people working to support Choe and Ling, all the volunteers, sponsors, and so forth, all the students. So by the force of all this merit gathered together, we can think, may all sentient beings be free from every form of suffering, especially may, as a human race on planet Earth, may we be able to quickly end climate destruction and end nuclear arms race and violent wars everywhere, violent conflicts. And especially now in this time of this COVID-19 pandemic, may we quickly find a cure to the pandemic, and maybe all as a human race learn to be better stewards for one another, better stewards of our planet, and to live in ways that are less destructive to the environment, less destructive to the livelihood of others. And may we take responsibility for providing for livelihood and well-being for one another and all the members of our human family. And especially for this purpose, may we quickly become fully enlightened. For that reason, may the Buddha Dharma flourish, especially may this center, Choe flourish, and in general, may the Dharma flourish, especially in India, especially the Nalanda tradition, the complete Nalanda tradition of Sutra and Tantra. So we can read these 3 verses of dedication from the Bodhisattva's way of life. And until they pass away from pain, may I also be the source of life for all the realms of varied beings that reach into the ends of space. Just like space and the great elements such as earth, may I always support the life of all the boundless creatures, for as long as space remains, and for as long as sentient beings remain. Until then, may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, so thank you all very much. I'll pass it back over to our host.
Legtsok, there's a question. There's a question from Sakina.
Can I ask a question about how Buddhism sees the manifestation and law of attraction stuff? Thanks. Yeah, I've heard about this law of attraction thing. It seems to be kind of what do you say? A big idea, kind of, I don't know, going viral. It's very popular online and Facebook and stuff like that. I'm not exactly sure what you mean. Can you fill in some details a little bit, Sakina?
Hi, yes, thank you, Venerable. I was wondering, so I've been doing a lot of work like this where people say if you get into the good energy frequency, then you attract more good things to you. And just that it's that simple, that there's good feeling and there's bad feeling, and whatever you are in kind of attracts more of that. And it's been working pretty well recently. Like I've just been manifesting a lot of good things by listening to like guided manifestation meditations. So, but I guess I just want to know, what is the Buddhist take on it? And also, is there a limit to this? Like, there must be more to it, is what I'm feeling. So I guess I want to know, like, is it such a big deal to manifest things? Maybe there's something deeper that is about finding peace no matter what you manifest. But I guess I'm struggling with that whole question. But
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, there's definitely a similar idea in Buddhism.
Okay.
But the way of explaining is probably a little more nuanced and a little different than probably most presentations of this kind of law of attraction. Maybe the similarity first. So what's similar in Buddhism is that, I mean, basically, the Buddha explained that why things happen to us is mostly explained by our karma, right? Especially the way we experience things, whether we experience things as pleasant or unpleasant, whether we have happy and supportive kind of experiences, or whether we experience things that harm us, like sickness and other people, abusing us, whether it's harmful experiences. That depends upon our karma, right?
Yes.
Primarily our karma. But we've had countless past lives.
Yeah.
So in countless past lives, in this life, we've created all kinds of karma. Some very virtuous karma, and some very non-virtuous karma, right? So we have all these different, those karmas, once we create a karma, it becomes an imprint in our mind stream. So it's like a seed that's waiting to ripen as an experience.
Okay.
So we have some very good seeds and very bad seeds.
Yes. Right.
So
Why do we
then,
have these? Okay.
so now where they're very similar with the law of attraction comes. So which seeds ripen? What determines which very good experiences? In large part, it depends upon our mental attitudes, right?
Yeah.
So if we have a lot of fear, if we have a lot of criticism of like mental criticism of others, if we have a lot of anger, those are all negative attitudes, right? They're non-virtuous attitudes.
Thank you. Yeah.
So those non-virtuous attitudes they'll become conditions for our non-virtuous karmas to ripen.
Okay, that makes sense. Yes.
Right? Does that make sense? Yeah. So
yeah.
basically, if we have negative attitudes, I mean, on the one hand, I'm explaining this karma, right? If we have negative attitudes, those negative ways of thinking are conditions to cause, negative karma that we've created in the past to ripen, which ripens as unpleasant experiences for us, right? But then in a more just everyday psychology way, like if we're angry all the time and in a bad mood, then, just like it affects other people around us. It tends to put them on edge, put them in a bad mood and not like being around us and not like us. And so, we tend to, it's like you see with people who complain all the time complain about things, they bond with other people through complaining, right? So then you end up surrounding yourself with people who just complain about things all the time, which is, that's kind of just law of attraction sort of thing. So, that's the negative side.
Okay.
The positive side is also true, right? So if we have positive attitudes about things, if we think, instead of when we see others, we think about others, we think about things we like about them, good things about them.
Yes.
That becomes a condition for our positive karmas to ripen and good things to happen to us, right? So it's very similar in that way, but not completely the same.
Okay. Thank you so much. That really helps a lot.
Sure, yeah, you're welcome.
Bye.
But try to think positive. That's definitely good to do.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, we should stop. So. Okay, now over to you, Shanti.
See you.
Thank you very much, Legtsok.
Shanti, did you want to say anything here at the end?
Yes, Venerable, thank you very much for the teachings today. Thank you. And for the participants,
Sure. Welcome.
part 7 of the Sunday teaching series, Transforming Suffering into Happiness, will be hosted on Sunday, September 6th from 2 p.m. to 3:30 p.m. India time. Session will be led by Venerable Tenzin Namjong. Part 7 of this teaching series with Venerable Legtsok, Two Truths in Buddhism, will be hosted on Tuesday, September 8th from 6:30 p.m. to 8 p.m. India time. So I'm sorry about the disruption that happened
Shanti,
today.
also, just to remind you all, His Holiness the Dalai Lama will be teaching on September 4th, 5th, and 6th in the morning from 9 to 10:30 in the morning. And then Tushita Dharamsala has asked me to lead review sessions every evening. I think they'll be from, I forgot the timing now. Anyway, we'll send the timing out over CKSL.
Thank you, everyone. And here's wishing all of you a fabulous week ahead. So stay safe. And
Okay,
see you
bye-bye.
soon.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Venerable.
Thank you. See you.